Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to each and every one of you to Bay Path College. We certainly are pleased to have such a great crowd. It's obvious that cybersecurity and cybersecurity management are definitely items on your mind. But today we're very pleased to combine the very first annual Cybersecurity Summit with our annual Innovators Lecture Series for, I think, what you will find to be a very inspiring, inspirational time together with our speakers and our panelists. But first, let me thank a few people in our audience who have made today possible. Obviously, there are a lot of individuals behind the scenes that are individuals who are committed to making sure that these programs are excellent in terms of content and certainly in terms of our breakfast. So can we first start by giving a round of applause to Aramark, our food service provider, for our breakfast today. In our audience, we have some individuals who have sponsored this annual Cybersecurity Summit, and I would like them to rise as I call off their companies. Access Data is one of our organizations sponsoring the summit today. The Women's Society of Cyber Justice, the Sumner and Toner Insurance Agency. I know you're out there, so please stand. The Economic Development Council of Western Massachusetts, Alan Blair. And it would not also be possible to have such an event as this without our own Board of Trustees and Advisory Council members who obviously believe in the college. Would you please all stand and let us give you a round of applause. Thank you very much for being with us. The team who developed the annual cybersecurity panelists today are under the direction of our very talented provost, Dr. Melissa Morris Olson. And she also is responsible for leading the development of the Masters of Science in Cybersecurity Management. She has a great team working with her. Dr. Tom Loper, our Dean of our School of Business and Social Justice. Dr. Larry Snyder, the Program Director for the MS in Cybersecurity Management that you will meet in a few moments. Ann Canton, the Administrative Assistant in Academic Affairs. Brianna Sittler, our Director of Special Programs Extraordinaire. Justin Letelier, our Manager for New Media Services. Kathy Robleski, our Director of Communications. Donna Kowaleski, Marketing Production Coordinator. And last but not least, I call her our Queen of the Web, Robin Rawson-Sicard, who is our Web Communications Manager. Would you please stand and let us give you a round of applause? They're very modest individuals. But for those of you who know me, I couldn't pass up the opportunity with doing a little bragging about Bay Path College and also some of the things that are on our horizon so that you can know and hear about this extraordinary college and what we're up to. So, as you know, in the spring of 2013, we did put together this program. We went to the Board of Higher Education in Massachusetts and had the MS in Cybersecurity Management approved. That was a major feat, and again, I'd like to thank Dr. Melissa Morris Olson for leading the charge. It is the first program of its kind in all of New England, not just Massachusetts. And obviously, with the growing incidence of cybercrime, both nationally and worldwide, this is a topic that has fueled a demand for professionals in the field. The program, as I said, is under the direction of Dr. Larry Snyder, and you'll hear more about him. And our first class will begin in October. So there is still time to register if any of your colleagues or you would be interested. Our admission department would be happy to talk to you. There are two new graduate programs on campus. Actually, they're not new. The Occupational Therapy Masters has been with Bay Path for many years, but the Physician Assistant Program is in its second class, and last night we had the white coat ceremony. These programs have grown so significantly that Bay Path College has purchased 11 acres of land in East Longmeadow, and we will be building a 58,000 square foot medical science building to house over 200 occupational therapists and our growing program in the physician assistant area. The building will also house additional programs in the medical and health sciences in the future, so watch for that. It will be built most likely in the next 15 to 18 months, and so we'll have a wonderful opening ceremony. The campus is spread. We're now here, obviously, in about 40-plus acres in Longmeadow. We'll have the 11 acres in East Longmeadow. We have a campus in Central Mass. We have a campus in Eastern Mass. And then the newest site also, where we're renting about 12,000 square feet, is in downtown Springfield. BayPath started there in 1897 as BayPath Institute, and we're back. We're back, and we're launching the first fully online undergraduate degree for adult women. So we have a little incubator down there. I, in fact, spend 2 days a week in Springfield walking the streets, saying hi to everybody I meet, and I spend 3 days here. So when you think I have a schizophrenic personality, I have a schizophrenic personality. So think of it. We're now down at 1350 Main. That's the Sovereign Bank building right on the corner across from the Mass Mutual Center. So for those of you who are in downtown Springfield, give me a wave, give me a high five, and wish us luck as we launch this incredible online program. It will be the first women's college and the first adult women's totally online undergraduate degree in America. And as you've heard me speak before, we really believe we are educating women for the new America workforce. And we're very excited to have a great staff there that believes in this and is helping us launch it. Today, our enrollment, when you count every student who takes a class at BayPath for credit, we're over 2,500 students, but we have 2,200 students fully engaged as degree-granting students in all of our undergraduate programs and our graduate degrees. And now we're on to the creation of, I think, our 15th, Melissa, graduate program. So BayPath is a very different institution than many of you remember from years ago. And we're pleased and thrilled to be that way. You know, when you think about cybersecurity, I think about the way higher education has moved into the online environment. Obviously, every organization has to worry about the security of their data. But I want you to know that higher education is really in a moment of change, and the online educational delivery model is what is causing this change. If you can believe it, 20% of our total credits at BayPath College are now online, mostly in the graduate degree, but when we launch this undergraduate women's program online, I think you'll see those numbers rising very quickly. Our faculty are very engaged in this type of teaching and learning. We received a Title III grant last year to help us figure the infusion of technology into our undergraduate programs, so stay tuned. I really do believe that the field of higher education is in the midst of a revolution that will change the way teaching and learning happens in our country. And our goal eventually is to make it much more affordable for all students in America. And finally, save the date for our women's conference in downtown Springfield. This will be, believe it or not, our 19th annual Women's Professional Development Conference. Last year we had Queen Latifah with 2,000 women in the audience. I wore my leopard shoes and interviewed her for 1 hour. It was quite an experience. But know that we have planned incredible speakers for you for the future, but I am sworn to secrecy at this moment. Put it on your calendar, April 25th, 2014. And now on to the Cybersecurity Summit. As I said, the importance of cybersecurity cannot be underestimated, and I'm sure that many of you have noticed that there is not a week that does not go by when you have seen an article or a newscast presentation about cybersecurity. No one is immune in this world, and everyone is a target. So all kinds of organizations, from government to Fortune 500 companies to internet startups to colleges and universities, we're all very concerned about cybersecurity. And we're very fortunate to have a great keynote speaker and our panel to talk about it today. Let me introduce, though, our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker has had firsthand experience in the world of cyber terrorism and cybercrime. Bob Milton is a leading figure in national and international security with a distinguished career that has spanned 4 decades. He has witnessed the shift in knowledge and technical expertise in the areas of analytics, forensics training, operational planning, leadership roles, security, legal, and law enforcement to a new mix of professionals that are now being called the cyber workforce. A retired commander of the London Metropolitan Police Service, New Scotland Yard, Bob played a leading role in the development and delivery of national counterterrorism strategies in England. He held many senior roles, including the National Coordinator of Ports Policing, Security Commander, Metropolitan Police, Head of VIP Protection, Director of Intelligence, International Terrorism, and Head of the UK National Terrorist Funding Unit. He is currently the Managing Director of Milton Tezelin Ltd, a company established in 2005 to deliver training and support to countries facing the threat of terrorism. He has worked closely with the United Kingdom's Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the European Commission and law enforcement, intelligence, security, and military organizations across Asia to provide high-level training programs. A respected consultant, Bob has also carried out strategic studies of the national security capability of countries and regions, providing in-depth reports and recommendations. His work has included a comprehensive assessment of airport and seaport security in Bahrain, a review of counterterrorism agencies in Indonesia, an assessment of counterterrorism capability and training needs in Southeast Asia, and a feasibility study of establishing an international counterterrorism training facility for Southeast Asia. For his groundbreaking work in establishing counterterrorism planning in Indonesia, he was decorated by the President of Indonesia. Bob is the ultimate law enforcement and security leader, perhaps because it's in his blood. His father and his wife have both served as police officers, and his beautiful wife, Karen Milton, is here today. Karen, welcome to America. Today, 2 of his 3 daughters are also police officers. And though he is incredibly proud of his service and his career, above all, Bob cherishes his family, including the youngest addition, his granddaughter, Lily. Now you're wondering, how did we get the former commander of New Scotland Yard to travel across the pond to come to Bay Path College? So here is the rest of the story. 15 years ago, Lady Margaret Thatcher visited Bay Path College, and she spoke in downtown Springfield to an audience of almost 2,000 men and women. It was an extraordinary day, one of the best I think I've ever had at Bay Path. And with her, because Bob was in the protective area of New Scotland Yard at the time, was this extraordinary gentleman, Bob Milton. And as he left, he gave me his card and said, when you're in London next time, give me a call. So I think all of you know me. The next time Noel and I were in London on a personal trip, we called Bob Milton. I think he was shocked, but he said, oh, what would you like to do? And well, we said we'd done the usual. And he said, well, how would you like to have lunch in Scotland Yard? And when we were escorted to the top floor and saw where he was, I said, oh my God, Noel, we are really at the top of New Scotland Yard. And then we had a lovely lunch, and then his big surprise for us was a private tour of 10 Downing Street where we met Tony Blair. So this relationship started here, then in a personal way, having lunch, never thinking we're gonna see him again. But we called him when the students went to London one time back in, I think, 2004. And so he and his wife, Karen, and that was the first time I met her, came and had dinner with our students. And the rest is now continuing. We have become dear friends, and Bob and Karen, I think, have a special place in their hearts for New England. So with that, it is an honor and a privilege to introduce to you Bob Milton, our keynote speaker.
Well, thank you, Carol. So that's why I'm here. I never knew. Well, good morning, and what a crowd. How come you've all turned up to see me this morning? I'm so impressed, and I'm so honored that you've given up some of your hours today, because a lot of you are very busy businessmen. You've got to get back and run your companies, so I'm absolutely overwhelmed that so many people have come here today to see me and my very distinguished panel of experts. So good morning particularly to President Leary. Good morning to her excellent staff. Good morning to the students who seem to be stalking me all week. Some of them have listened to me now, I think 4 or 5 times, and that, to be honest with you, is above and beyond any Call of Duty. They should be awarded a distinguished something, for that. Okay. But what I have done is I found that I normally speak to hard-nosed police officers, to military people, to security people, and they're easy compared to the students of Bay Path, who have challenged me like no other person has ever challenged me. So thank you for that, and I have thoroughly enjoyed my time here at Bay Path. Now, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, although the nice words that Dr. Leary said, I'm afraid I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I'm a person that just tried to help the UK deal with a whole variety of threats. The threat of terrorism, the threat of espionage, the threat of organized crime. And over those 40 years of working, I've come to learn and understand how that you can only do this in partnership. And that partnership extends way beyond the government and the police service and everything else. It extends to the private and the public sector, and particularly the public. So I'm going to talk to you today from that position, the position of someone who has tried to protect the people from these various threats. And let me start off by saying, when I knew I was doing this, I suddenly thought I'd better show a keen interest in cybersecurity. And fortunately, the BBC showed a Horizon program, a very good Horizon program called Defeating the Hackers. And I sat there with my pen in hand, thinking this is going to give me inspiration. And I was hanging on pretty well. They were talking about, public key codes and prime numbers being multiplied together, and I'm thinking, yeah, I get that, that's good. Then they went on to something called quantum cryptology, and I thought, I'm not so sure about that. But when they talked about some quantum processor that existed in different states at the same time, I threw my pen and paper on the floor and said, I can't do this. But suddenly, as if a shining light, the presenter said, of course, the advances in science is a threat to our systems, but the real threat is us, human beings. And it was that moment I realized, yeah, that is what the problem is. We can be very, very good at protecting our systems, and we need these very clever scientists to help us. But actually, it's the human beings that we need to work on. That's the dimension that actually causes us the biggest problems. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. But I'm not going to be all doom and gloom about cyberspace. I want to actually start by talking about the good of cyberspace, because I think it's a fantastic thing. If you consider the impact it has had on all our lives in the last 2 decades. When I started protecting people, I didn't even have a mobile phone. I had a pager that would bleep every so often, and I'd have to then stop and find a public telephone box. Nowadays, communication is instantaneous, and that's a fantastic advance for us. It's impacted on everything we do. It strengthens societies. That's what I honestly believe. I believe the fact that we can speak to each other, that we can speak across borders, that we can break down barriers, particularly cultural, racial, social, economic barriers, is absolutely crucial. And let's talk about the Arab Spring. Let's talk about what's happening across the whole of Middle East and North Africa and other parts of the world. Let's talk about countries that for years and years and years have held their people down and have kept them isolated from the rest of the world. And what have we got now? We have people realizing that they're not alone, that they can call out to the international community. They can show what's happening through videos and images, and the international community can respond and support them. And although there is a lot of turmoil in the world, far better to have that turmoil than a people that is oppressed. So we look at Libya, we look at what's happening in Syria, we look at what's happening in Egypt. These are good things. And countries such as North Korea, they can try as hard as they can to isolate their people, to control their access to cyberspace. But ultimately, it will not work. The barriers have been broken down as easily and as quickly as the Berlin Wall fell and Eastern Europe broken up. And that is something we should absolutely celebrate. The other thing about cyberspace is it gives us information. Sometimes you've got to be careful. I tell my students, if they quote Wikipedia at me, I'm going to throw their papers away. You know, Wikipedia is a great website. Check your sources, okay? But access to information, what that does, it gives us the ability to make better decisions. Whether that's buying a car, choosing a hotel, choosing a holiday, or actually determining how you want to live in the world. Changing your culture, changing your community. That's why it's so important about the ability to access information. And I'm so pleased Dr. Leary mentioned education, because to me that is one of the key benefits of cyberspace, online education. How many people now are able to achieve an education that they could not possibly achieve because of their lifestyle, their family commitments, etc.? That is just unbelievable, and that is opening the eyes, opening people's view of the world, making people better, giving them greater opportunities. And that is something that we really need to continue to encourage, and I'm so pleased that Bay Path College is moving down that road. So that's the good. Let's go to the bad. And there is a lot of bad. Somebody described cyberspace as a bad neighborhood with dark virtual places with evil people lurking to grab you. It's sad that it is described that way, because we really want people to be reassured, to feel safe in cyberspace, particularly our children. But the fact is there are predators out there are people out there who want to use cyberspace to hurt us. Now, whether that's online fraud or whether that's terrorists trying to recruit new terrorists, glorify terrorism, we need to protect them. We need to do something that helps us deal with this particular problem. One of the things we can do, of course, is we can work on what we call big data. And big data to me is something that a lot of people are concerned about, particularly the work the NSA, GCHQ are doing, the PRISM, the Tempura projects. But it's something that's going to help us identify these predators. It's something that's going to help us identify patterns of behavior. It's something that's very important to us. Yes, there's going to have to be checks and balances. Yes, there's going to have to be regulations. We need to be sure that they're not invading our privacy unnecessarily. But big data is a very important thing. The ability to analyze it, to check for patterns, to use that information to make us better at what we do is important. Carol mentioned my granddaughter, Lily. Lily started the life in a very poor way. She had 5 weeks in intensive care. She was wired up to all sorts of machines monitoring her vital signs. She's good now, so please don't feel sad. She's recovered. But you know what struck me when I was sitting in the intensive care was that all this information was going nowhere. Every half an hour, somebody would come along and just write something on a piece of paper. But they weren't using the information. And then the other day I read a fascinating article about a woman that used to work for a supermarket. She crunched the numbers. She worked out that I, for instance, like a particular brand of scotch, and my wife likes a particular type of cake. And we would then be bombarded with advertising for that. She went to the health service, and she said, "You're not using this data." And now she's working with them to collect all this data, and it means that doctors can predict what's happening to these babies a lot quicker. They can see how their medication is impacting them a lot earlier, and it's saving lives. So big data is a good thing, provided you have proper control and regulation, because I know people are concerned. But when you think that every minute there are 240 emails flying around space, they're not looking at yours, I can assure you. They might be looking at mine, because my emails tend to contain the phrases terrorism a lot. And I'm sure someone in the NSA is saying, who the hell is this Bob Milton and what's he doing? You know? But that's okay. That's a price I'll pay. I don't mind about that. Okay. So I'm going to look now at some specific threats. And I'm going to start with the biggest one for me, and that is terrorism. Now, terrorists use the internet in a number of different ways. The most divisive way they use the internet is to reach out to vulnerable people. Now, you all heard about the attacks in Kenya recently in the Westgate shopping mall. That was carried out by a particularly nasty group of people called Al-Shabaab, and they are based in Somalia. Al-Shabaab are experts at propaganda. They're experts at using the internet, chat rooms, social media sites to reach out and pass on their hatred and their disgust for the West to vulnerable young men. And there's a suggestion that over 250 young men from England are currently in Somalia in the Al-Shabaab training camps. And they got there because they were radicalized through the internet. And during the attack, Al-Shabaab were using social media sites not only to direct the attack, but to publicize it and glorify it. Al-Qaeda produced a magazine called Inspire. And it is an extremely glossy, well-made magazine. You could pick it up on the shelf, you think, well, that looks good, let's have a look at that. It is full of venom. It is full of hatred for the USA and the UK. It is full of cries for martyrdom. And that's published on the web. And a lot of men and women are reading that and becoming radicalized. And the worry we have is that they become lone wolf terrorists. And I know, and it was the most saddest day when I heard about the Boston Marathon bombings, that many of you will still feel raw about what happened there. But we need to understand how those two brothers became radicalized. What happened to them? And how did they learn about the pressure cooker bomb? Well, they learned it through the internet. And that will come out, no doubt, in the trial that's coming up. So the internet is a terrible thing for terrorists. Or it's a good thing for terrorists, it's a terrible thing for us. Let me mention Maggie Thatcher again, the one that brought me here to Bay Path College. In the 1980s, Lady Thatcher said, the media is the oxygen for the terrorists. What she's basically saying is that without publicity, terrorists cannot survive. If she was standing here today, bless her, unfortunately she died last year, I think she'd say the internet and cyberspace are the oxygen for the terrorists. That's where we have moved. Now, sadly, the terrorists are also looking to use cyberspace not simply to recruit people and to glorify their acts, but to attack us, but to use cyberspace to attack us. The UK Terrorism Act in 2000 specifically included an offence of interfering with electronic data, electronic systems. and that's their ambition. Now, some of you may know about the Stuxnet virus that was infecting control program systems in the Iranian nuclear power stations. Where that came from, I would not want to speculate. The fact that it disrupted the Iranian nuclear power stations and facilities for about 18 months may give you a bit of a clue. But Stuxnet has got away from it. Stuxnet is out there. Stuxnet has infected hundreds of thousands of systems. And if one of those hundreds of thousands of systems happens to be an air traffic control computer, then we're in trouble. And there's no doubt in my mind that terrorists have ambitions to do that. They have ambition to use viruses, cyberspace against us. So what we're looking to the future is not weapons of mass destruction, but cyber weapons of mass destruction. And it's something we really need to be thinking very carefully about. Let's move away from terrorism for a second. Let's look at the problems of social media sites. I mean, I love Facebook. I keep in touch with all my family and my students through Facebook. My wife logs my every movement on Facebook. And I really enjoy it. But sadly, Facebook and the other social sites can be used for bad, particularly cyberbullying. I've known quite a few cases where young men and young women have been really traumatized by cyberspace, by the Facebooks, even leading to some very, very tragic cases. And of course, there's also sexual predators on Facebook and Twitter, etc. I'm not picking out Facebook. I just happen to know more about Facebook than anything else. Okay. And in last year in London, we had terrible riots, awful riots. And they were started because the police shot and killed an armed robber called Michael Duggan. Very quickly, Facebook, social media sites were full of rumor and gossip and inaccurate accounts of what had happened. And before we knew where we were, we had violent demonstrations leading to riots. And those riots were fueled by Facebook. So people would get onto Facebook, the various community sites, they would be directed to new places to riot, go down to this electrical shop, the windows are broken, go over to there. And the police service very rapidly lost control. We could not keep pace with what was happening. Fortunately, we're quick learners. And we started to realize that we could use these social media sites against the rioters. And we started doing that, and we got control. And I'm pleased to say that most of the rioters now are accessing Facebook from inside a prison cell. Because guess what? If you put on Facebook, I'm going to go and break into such and such an address and steal their TV set, we're going to find you, and we're going to arrest you for it. And that's exactly what happened. And the great thing about Facebook was that it suddenly went full circle, and the communities that were affected by the riots, and they were badly affected, used Facebook to gather support. And it was a wonderful, complete turnaround now that the Facebook sites and the Twitter sites brought together those communities. It was absolutely wonderful to see. Let me talk about espionage for a moment. I was involved in a number of cases of tracking down KGB spies. It sounds all like, you know, George Smiley and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and to some extent it was. In fact, I was about 20 feet away from arresting a KGB agent after 6 months of work when our good friend again, Lady Thatcher, Maggie Thatcher, stopped it because Gorbachev had agreed to come to tea with her. And he didn't want the trouble of me arresting this Russian spy. But what I'm saying is that the effort that they had to go through to just steal a couple of sheets of paper was extraordinary. The tradecraft they had to use to do that was incredible. The personal risks they went through. Not anymore. Mr. Snowden took away over 53,000 documents, and he did it pretty easily. So espionage against states, industrial espionage against people, companies, is a big issue for us. because it's all too easy, not to steal one document, but to steal a whole series of documents. So that's another area that we need to be really working on, okay? Now, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to sort of try and wrap up a bit quicker than I would do normally, okay? But what I want to talk about now is how I see businesses, the public, the national, international community working together to develop really effective strategies. And one of the things I want to see is the international community, really stepping up to the plate. All I'm seeing at the moment is the United Nations holding seminars and having discussions. We've got to go beyond that. We've got to be thinking bigger than that. We've got to be thinking about how we can bring countries together to work on this problem. And there are interesting examples out there of how it can be done. There are a number of bankers here today, and you know that over the last 2 decades, anti-money laundering legislation has really made a difference. And you are regulated, you have to comply with certain national and international rules to ensure that it's as hard as possible for people to move bad money around. That is all directed internationally, and particularly terrorist funding is very, very closely controlled internationally. It's perhaps time to start thinking at that level for cybersecurity. It's perhaps time to start looking at putting compliance in place, international compliance on cybersecurity. Legislation, criminal legislation, terrorist legislation is not coping with cybersecurity. And again, we need to think about how internationally we can cope with this. Because there could be an attack from one part of the world to another part of the world. How on earth are law enforcement agencies going to deal with this investigation? So we really do need to be thinking about how we can bring people together, bring countries together for a cohesive way of investigating cyber attacks. So the strategy has to be on an international level, but it has to be based on threat. And threat comes from good intelligence. Understanding the threat comes from good intelligence. So again, we need to ensure that we can share intelligence across the world. Now, the problem we have here is that there are some very, very good, cybersecurity companies out there. But they are companies who are running a business. They're making a profit. They may not want to share this intelligence. So we've got to think of a way of dealing with that. And I would like to see every country having a joint cybersecurity assessment center, similar to the very, very good bomb data centers that exist throughout the world. Get them linked together, networked together, so if there's an attack in one part of the world, we quickly know about it, and we can spread the information around, and we can understand the intelligence, and that leads us to a much more accurate understanding of the threat. Okay. This is what we've got to do. At the moment, all I see is a lot of talk and a lot of national action, but not a lot of international action. This is what we've got to achieve. And the strategy itself has got to be broad. You cannot simply focus on a firewall. That doesn't work anymore. There is no fence that you can put up that's going to stop them getting through. So you've got to have a much broader strategy in that. At one end of the strategy, you've got to be thinking about prevention. You've got to be thinking about changing the culture of an organization. You've got to think about educating the public. You've got to about thinking about putting measures in place that identify potential problems before they happen. Whether you've got somebody in your organization who perhaps is changing their behavior in some way and could be a risk to you. You need to understand that. You need to work with that. You need to ensure that you have really solid investigation in place. So if something happens, you can react to it quickly. And that could be within your company. Your small company could be the first to see this problem. So you need to have people in place who can immediately react to that, preserve the evidence, hold it down until you get the experts coming in. The very important golden first hour of any investigation is important. Otherwise, you start losing your evidence. We need to develop better forensic capability. We're good at the moment, we need to be better. And again, if we look at our legislation, it can't cope with cyber attacks because the amount of time it takes to investigate, to interrogate a computer, to extract the evidence, we can't hold people in custody that long. So we need to think again about our criminal justice systems, our legislation. I can hold somebody, well, I used to be able to when I was a police officer, I could hold people in custody for 28 days if I suspected them of terrorism. Yeah, there were checks and balances, but that's what I could do. A few years ago, we tried to extend that to 56 days because we were concerned about the fact that if we seized computers, we couldn't get into them and we couldn't get the evidence. There were other issues, but that was one of the issues, one of our arguments. Okay. So you need prevention, and you need really good investigation, and you need really good intelligence. And then, of course, you need to have a strategy that protects it, protects the systems, protects the hardware. You certainly don't want your people leaving their laptops in restaurants, like the naval officer did in the UK, and it contained the whole of the strategic plan for the UK Navy. Slightly embarrassing, yeah? But these things happen. Human beings make terrible mistakes. We all do. Human beings click on things they shouldn't click on. Human beings follow links they shouldn't follow links. They send emails. They go home because they want to access their work emails on a Sunday morning. But their wireless network is not secure and somebody's stealing their data and they're getting into your system through the back door. So we need to think about protecting all that. And because human beings want their systems to work for them. There's no point having a login that is so complicated it takes half an hour. There's no point having passwords that they can't possibly remember, so they write it down and they stick it on the top of the computer. And you know it happens. And if I was to do a poll here and say, how many people have got a passport that contains the name of their dog, the name of their daughter, and I can see you smiling, the name of their favorite something, and then we'll make it harder by putting numbers on it, so we'll put a birthday date on it. Now, come on, you know it's true. And how often do you have the same password for about 10 different accounts because you can't remember them otherwise? You know it's true. So we've got to get away from that. Passwords are old. Passwords are gone. We've got to be better. We've got to think of different ways of doing it. And I'm not sure biometrics is the answer either, but there must be a better way of doing it. So we've got to think about how we can protect our systems, but still allow our workforce the ease of use, because that's what we want. We want them to be able to use the systems. We want them to be able to talk to each other. We want them to be able to log on quickly. I mean, I absolutely hate antivirus software because it churns away on my computer and I sit there and I watch that little thing going around and around and around and around. I understand why I need it, but it drives me mad. And how often do you want to just reach over and press off button? You know? You do, but we don't do it. The final thing of the strategy needs to be recovery. You need to plan for it happening to you, because I tell you what, one day it's going to happen to you. So you've got to get everything back up and running. You've got to reassure your workforce, your customers, the public, because you don't want to lose your reputation. You don't want to lose the confidentiality of your customers. They may go somewhere else if they think that your site isn't secure. So you've got to get into that as quick as possible. And that means you've got to identify it happening, which means you've got to have a system within your company that alerts you should something be going wrong. So recovery, absolutely crucial. Now, I'm going to finish by saying what I always say in every presentation I ever give. And some of you have heard it before, so those people who have heard it before, I want you to be surprised when I say it. Okay? In 1984, I was in Brighton, and the IRA blew up the Grand Hotel and tried to kill Maggie Thatcher. The reason they didn't was that she was still writing her speech, same as I was last night at 3 o'clock in the morning. No, I was asleep. But they released a statement the following day. There were people killed in that Brighton bomb, I should say, but she survived. The IRA released a statement the following day, and they said, today, you were lucky. But you have to be lucky all the time. We only have to be lucky once. Do you agree with that? No. No. I prefer to take the words of Gary Player. I'm sure there are quite a few golfers in this audience. Okay? I like what Gary Player said. Gary Player said, the harder I practice, the luckier I become. And any golfer here knows that's true, because when I hit the ball, it goes in the water. The guy I'm playing with, it ends up hanging on the edge. The harder you practice, the luckier you become. The harder we work at protecting our cyberspace, the luckier we will become, the better we will be at protecting it. And we can do it. Do not ever think we cannot do this. Yet they're out there. Yet they're attacking us. Yet they're sending hundreds of thousands of emails out, hoping they're going to get 1 or 2% of people to come back. Yeah, okay, it's there, but we can do it. We can protect it. And one of the ways to protect it, particularly if you're running a company, is to embrace cybersecurity. Not as a bolt-on, not as someone sitting in the basement and you call them up when you can't switch your computer on, but someone who actually is part of your strategic planning. Someone who's going to be there all the time working with you, actually saving you money, making your systems better. Because as we have more and more online shopping, more and more use of IT, people will go to where they think companies are running secure systems, particularly banks. So you need to have people in place that can support you on that, senior people in place. And they need to be trained professionals. So now the big plug, okay, for the Bay Path Cybersecurity Management Program. That are the sort of people you should be employing. And they've got to not only work on the tech side, so they have one foot in that tech camp, but they have another foot in the human side of the human resources department, and they're working directly with the board to help you. So be lucky out there, but make your own luck and employ a Bay Path cybersecurity expert when they finish in a couple of years' time. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Incredible. What a way to kick off Cybersecurity Awareness Week. And there is such a thing, Cybersecurity Awareness Week. The Division of Homeland Security of the United States has actually 10 years ago initiated something called Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I said week, month, and this is actually the 10th anniversary. So it's interesting that we have our first Cybersecurity Summit on that 10th anniversary. But thank you again, Bob. And I do want to position the rest of the morning. We will have you out of here at 10 o'clock. And let me tell you where we're going from here. We asked Bob to talk about the global nature of cybersecurity and cyber terrorism. And we wanted to try to position the rest of the workshop to help you to understand how we think we need to start to look at this from a management perspective. There's much going on in this world, as you just heard from Bob, and there's much going on in the IT world trying to help us to better protect our systems. But we've got this interesting little situation, and Larry came up with this yesterday, and I never heard it before, but he said, math is perfect, computers are logical, and human beings are neither perfect nor logical. And there's where the rub is. That's where we run into a little bit of a challenge here. And I want to talk just a little bit about our background and how this program came to be, and then position our next speaker, who will talk about, our next speaker is going to be talking about the risk management nature of cybersecurity. And then our final speaker will be Larry. And Larry will be talking about the nature of how this all relates to us and what we can do as individuals to help to counter cybersecurity challenges that we're facing at this time. So let me just go back and talk about this. As you've just heard, human behavior plays a significant role in the new world of cybercrime. In fact, one of the weakest links in the development and implementation of an effective cybersecurity plan is the human factor. The massive introduction of new technologies such as mobile devices, laptops, wireless networks, cloud computing, and even social media have given users and workers incredible access to data. And having been a business owner myself, there's nothing more important to us than our employees having access to data and being linked together, especially with our customers and with our vendors. These people, whether knowing or unknowingly, often engage in risk behavior that exposes them or their organizations to a serious data breach. Managing cybersecurity issues combined with holistic approaches that engage in all areas of an organization helps to minimize risk or have an effective response to cyber breaches. Our Master of Science in Cybersecurity Management prepares people to be those leaders at the front lines of this growing threat. How and why this program was established illustrates what BayPath does so well. About 3 years ago, our provost, Dr. Melissa Morris-Olson, learned that one of our criminal justice graduates had decided to pursue a master's degree in cybersecurity. She investigated this the program, and discovered that there was great demand for people in this profession, and more importantly, there was a desperate need for cybersecurity managers. Dr. Morris-Olson knew that the BayPath certainly had the faculty, talent, and academic foundation in management, criminal justice, legal studies, and forensics to have a very robust graduate degree in this field. Enter attorney Paul Khalil from Springfield. Paul, I think you're in our audience out here today, a longtime friend and patron of BayPath College, and a seasoned online criminal justice educator with a great interest in cybersecurity. He worked very closely with our faculty and staff to design and develop the foundation of this integrated curriculum that our master's degree in cybersecurity management is based upon today. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Morris-Olson and attorney Paul Khalil for the extraordinary leadership and scholarship in the creation of our new Master of Science in Cybersecurity Management. Our panelists today will speak about two critical areas: risk management and how everyone, even at home, is vulnerable to stolen data or identities. First, David Martin will be presenting on the implications of human behavior on the cybersecurity risk management process. David is a veteran financial executive whose career includes stints at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Citibank, and AllianceBernstein. Mr. Martin, now an acknowledged expert on risk management, was the founding chairman of the Investment Company Institute's Risk Committee and co-chair of the Buy-Side Risk Committee, composed of chief risk officers of the 20 largest asset management firms in the country. So we're going from very, very large global issues. We're going to be talking about very large corporate issues and dealing with what's going on in each of our businesses from a risk management perspective. He is also an adjunct professor at New York University's Stern School of Business, author of Risk and the Smart Investor, published by McGraw-Hill in the fall of 2010, and author of The Nature of Risk, published by Amazon in 2012. He has also published numerous white papers on compliance, including one that's on your tables, and risk, enterprise risk management, corporate governance, and cybersecurity. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker, David Martin.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I just wanted to first tie my remarks into Bob's. It reminded me of a story many years ago. I had lunch with Margaret Thatcher in Singapore. And sitting at the table with her, I said, Lady Thatcher, why did you go to war with Saddam Hussein? She looked right through me and said, never let a bully push you around. And I called up Bush, and we went to war. And from a risk management perspective, it had a real impact on me because at the end of the day, when you make risk management decisions, you think about them, you have to think about them very clearly, point one. And point two, you have to have very clear lines of demarcation, clear lines that when you get over a point, you do something about it. So that's the tie-in, okay? The other thing about risk management that I wanted to share with you is that people always ask me, what is risk management? What is this all about? And I simply say, it's really the lack of information. When you have a lack of information, you incur risk. And the job of a risk manager is to fill in that missing information. So if you have clear lines of demarcation and you know that you have to get more information, okay, that makes you a pretty good risk manager. So I want to start by telling you how I got into cybersecurity, how I started thinking about it. And it happened about nearly 20 years ago when I was the enterprise risk manager for Citicorp. And the senior manager, the management of the bank, the most senior management, the chairman and CEO, the president, and the 5 people who ran the major businesses, we used to get together once a quarter and for the whole day. And I used to put on a road show. And I used to dance for 8 or 10 hours and talk about risk. And you know, big banks are like battleships. You know, it takes a lot of water to move them. So you really got to be out in front of the risk. And rather than getting up there and dancing for 8 hours myself, I said, you know what, let me spice this meeting up a little bit. So I used to invite all kinds of crazy people. And I read this book called Takeout by Takamura, who was a professor at MIT. And he had taken out Kevin Mitnick, who was a famous cybersecurity crook. You know, Kevin Mitnick actually challenged him, and they fought it out, and he tracked him down, and he got him arrested. So, you know, being the enterprise risk management, I could, in those days, call up anybody in the world and get him to do whatever I wanted. So I called up Takamura, and I said, hey, why don't you come down to the bank? I want you to do this little consulting gig. You know, I want you to hack the bank. I don't want you to get really inside, but get pretty close. I want you to come and talk to me, you know, talk to the senior management about it. So I hired him to do this. And I didn't know what to expect at the meeting, but I knew we were going to have some fun. And he tells me, like, before, he says, listen, just go out to the local store and get me a mobile phone. I'm like, okay. Tell my admin, get a mobile phone. The guy walks in. Mobile phone's on the desk, you know, around the table. So the first thing he does is takes out, this is 20 years ago, takes out the mobile phone out of the plastic, unwraps it, you know, opens up the back, fools around with it a little bit, and puts it on voice, on voice so you can hear it. And he's tapping into every single admin on the floor. This is the executive floor of Citicorp, and he's listening to every conversation, and we're listening to it 20 years ago. And then he goes on to tell us how he was, you know, so he got everybody's attention very quickly. And at that point, people were ready to listen. He said, okay, you know, I could easily take down your entire call center. This is for the credit card business that we had across the entire United States. I'll just bombard it. I'll put so much traffic through it, okay, that you guys won't even be able to answer the calls. You know? So if you think about that, 20 years ago, okay, and then you come to today, and you think about what's going on today, life's changed a lot. There's a lot going on. Now let me see if I can just move this forward. Okay, so, you know, riding up here, I saw all these beautiful estates, and I was thinking about, you know, let's go back 200 years. You have a huge house, and you have a moat around the house, a huge castle, moat around the castle, right? 200 years go by, have this big house, this moat around the castle. And by the way, drones come into, the world of drones come into play, right? So you think you're in this beautiful castle, you got this moat around you, okay? And you think, anybody comes in, I got it. But you don't think, hey, a drone can come in and just blow me up. So the world has changed, and this whole idea about hardened perimeters, they don't work. So most people, most senior executives in banks, you know, have an IT guy. He said, hey, you take care of this. I got an IT guy. I got the best IT guy. Okay, guess what? This hardened security, putting this shell around your company, does not work. So you think you're protected, but you're really not. Second point, threat actors themselves. I mean, unfortunately, I get hacked, like my own account, once a month. Why? I have a lot of contacts in the Middle East. Just came back from the Middle East. I was there for 3 weeks. You know, I have very sophisticated people that I deal with, right? So they have very sophisticated bugs on their emails, right? They send them to me. You know, guess what? every month I get hacked, and it's just part of life. It's a toll that I pay. Okay, so the sophistication of the people that you're dealing with they're far, far more sophisticated than when you're used to. And lastly, the attack surfaces what's out there to be attacked has increased substantially. So think about business, okay? You have many more customers, you're much more sophisticated than them, and they're easily attacked. What a great business to be in, okay? So you have to think about things differently. It requires new thinking. Now, I'll tell you a very interesting story, and I really I got a great laugh out of this one. Last Christmas, two guys got dressed up as Santa Claus and had a box of thumb drives, huge box of thumb drives. They printed up the company's logo, they put it on a box, and they put it in the okay, move closer to the mic. They put it, this box, right in front of the company's headquarters the day before Christmas, all right? Everybody came in, walking into work, saw this beautiful box with the company logo and these thumb drives, gifts. So what did they do? They took the thumb drive, they walked in, they plugged them in to their computers, the crooks were in. So you think about that, life's changed. These are very sophisticated people, okay? And we have to change. We have to think about this differently, okay? You talked about Facebook. I'm off Facebook. I'm just off it. You have your birthday. You have everybody knows everything about you. You think it's that hard to hack you, to figure out when your birthday is, what your codes are? I mean, get real. I mean, it's right there. So social networks, very difficult problem today. Mobile computing devices, how many have lost a cell phone? How many do not have the proper security on their cell? Apple just came out with a new, you have to put in a 4-digit security code. Real easy to get at. Now, trusted sources of data. Let me just give you one idea. In the financial services business, we have data that we use. You have a ticker tape. I mean, you have the pricing going back and forth. You have, I'll tell you an interesting story. I wrote in the article. People took a short position in commodities, and they altered the weather report. So people actually thought the weather report, there was going to be a big storm. People sold short. They had, a position, and they made a ton of money. So it's interesting that what you think is a trusted source is not. And I like to say, like, the vulnerability that people have today, this course is so terrific because why? The greatest vulnerability we have today is the faulty human behavior. And it's all of us. I mean, you talk about sophisticated bugs. The header on my emails was somehow changed. I went into my control panel to change the header. Guy was in. I was hacked again. Okay, we don't think about things the way we should think about things, and we need to change the way we think. Now, I'll just give you some interesting thoughts in terms of how I changed as a risk manager, and how I think about things, and how you should think about things in terms of risk, and how you should think about things in terms of cybersecurity. Point one, story one. I used to think I was a good risk manager, and when I left Citibank, I opened up an incubator of hedge funds. And hedge funds trade very, very actively, and it was right around the tech bubble. And I had these stop losses that said, when you lose 5%, we're out of the position. And lo and behold, every morning, the market went down 5%, opened up 5% below than where it closed. So I thought I was a great risk manager, but somehow I was losing a lot of money. And I realized, point one, everybody's a risk manager. That it's not just the risk manager, this command, I wrote an article once called The End of Enterprise Risk Management. It's not about command and control structures. If you want to think about risk management in a bank, in a small bank, everybody is a risk manager. The person that makes the transaction, the person that records it, every single person is a risk manager. You have to think about risk in its totality in terms of the whole company. So you have to change the way you think about risk. The other thing is that risk is all about the absence of data. So you have to get more data. You have to be out in front. I'll give you an example. Chief risk officer of a major asset manager. We had about $875 billion of assets under management. And it was a time of Lehman. Now, I spent a lot of time restructuring Latin American countries, restructuring Latin American banks, so I know a bankrupt company when I see one. But during the week of the Lehman problem, I called up the margin clerk. Okay, I didn't actually call him. I went down to see him. I said, listen, I want you to tell me how we're being marked. Now, what does that mean? We do a buy-sell transaction, a repo, right? We put up collateral. So the market value of the collateral goes up and down every day. So people mark the collateral. They mark it to market. Now, think about this, right? If the market value of the collateral goes down, okay, they're going to call me. They're going to call me up and ask for more collateral. If it goes up, they'll ask me less. So I said to the margin clerk, I said, listen, I want you to tell me how tight Lehman is marking us. So, because why? If they mark me tight, they need money. And that's going to tip me off. So every hour, I'd call them up and say, how are we being marked? And I get information every hour. I see them getting tighter and tighter and tighter. They're calling us. I know they're running out of money. I said, guys, we're out. 3 days before Lehman blew, we were out. Okay? I wasn't a genius. I mean, I've been through it before, but the point is that get the data beforehand. When you talk about cybersecurity and you talk about attacks, build the structure around you. Take that moat and make sure when the guy comes in that he's in, and let him fool around a little bit. Let him, but make sure, it's like my house. This is the brightest lit house on the street. Okay, I have all the cars in the driveway. I never put them in the garage. Okay, I got a little sign in. It says protected by the alarm company. If you're going to get me, it's going to be a tough one. Okay, another point. I also, I always say this. I think I was a good risk manager until Sandy came around. Now let me explain that. I had 5 years ago, I built a generator in my house. I put a generator in that would light up the whole house. I put an underground gas system so I didn't have to have deliveries coming. Okay, so anything happens, lights go out, I'm lit up. Fine. I never realized the magnitude. This was a storm that was 200, never had a storm like this in 200 years. I never thought, because I lived near the ocean, that the ocean will rise up 10 feet and actually, drown my generator. So the point is that when you think about risk management, get those clear lines of demarcation, get the information ahead of yourself, but always realize that what you think the threat is, it's always a lot bigger. It's always a lot faster. It's always a lot stronger. It's always a lot harder to recover from. You got to think about it in that context. So we have problems. How do we fix it? What do we do? What's the approach that we should use? So I'd like to give you some of my ideas, how I think about it, okay? The first thing is that when you have a company, when you have a small bank, think about things differently. Don't think about it, it's the IT department's problem. It's the, distribution's problem, it's the accounting's problem, it's everybody's problem. So do it from a coordinated company perspective. The total company should think about it as their problem, not just the IT's problem. And think about ways in terms of how you get smarter at this. Second, senior management. It's not, people don't realize the implications of these kinds of issues when you have personal data of people. It's pretty complicated. Think about the reputational hit that you have. So you have to think about, what is important here? What am I trying to safeguard? What are the controls surrounding it? It was funny, I looked at IMG case many years ago where they lost a ton of money from one single trader. What was the issue? At the end of the day, the guy was in the back office. He moved to the front office. He knew all the controls. He knew how to circumvent, everything. So when he was losing positions, he created fictitious positions. Why? He knew the back end. He knew the front end. How many times do people transfer in your company and you don't change their permissions? So you have to think about it from a senior management perspective, and you also have to think about it company-wide. Mandatory training. You know, how many companies have actually online or classroom training? How are you thinking about this? Are we aware of this? What are we doing about it? What kind of training do we have? You know, and what kind of programs, what kind of active mitigation, what are we doing as a company to get ahead of this problem? And you know what? How are we disclosing it? How are we thinking about it? You know, because if we don't do it right and we get hit and we get very embarrassed and we have reputational risk, we might have problems with the government. We might have issues soon. We might have to go out of business. There might be things that we need to do. So that's a little bit about my perspective. I think I would conclude by saying, you know, I'm one of these last guys still standing, you know. So you know, not that I'm schizophrenic, but one of the things that have helped me in being through so many different issues and problems, I think the first thing is going back to Margaret Thatcher, get those clear lines, you know, understand when they're breached and when they're not. 2, be out in front. Always be out in front. You know, it could be the idea of practicing, you know, makes you better, but be out in front. Try to anticipate, try to get out there, try to gather information. You know, I always talk to dissidents. Why? They have a kernel, they might be, sometimes they're out ahead. You want to get a sense of being out ahead. And lastly, actively manage the problem. You know, actively manage it. Don't be asleep at the switch. Make sure you're out in front and you're actively managing it. Thank you very much.
Well, we're narrowing down on this issue. Seriously, one of the things that we've discovered as we've gotten more and more into this is that we need to take a systematic approach to this systemic problem. We cannot just look at this as being an IT problem. And each of our speakers so far have been talking about the breadth and scope, the pervasiveness of the challenge. So how do you as a manager get on top of all of these challenges? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. We're going to bring it home, and we're going to first zero right in on you as individuals, not even as managers. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what you as individuals, who may be managers, may be able to bring into your organizations to help you to start to approach this in a more systematic way. With 18 years in law enforcement, fraud, and auditing in the U.S. Army and a variety of industries, and 9 years as a pioneer in the field of cybersecurity education, Professor Larry Snyder brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the position of Director for the Master of Science in Cybersecurity Management. Professor Snyder was instrumental in developing the cybersecurity program for the State University of New York, Herkimer County Community College, one of the first cybercrime programs in New York State. Under his leadership, obtained national certification from Information Assurance Courseware Evaluation and the Committee on National Security Systems. His background also includes positions in major United States banks as a manager of fraud operations and senior information systems auditing. Please join me in welcoming Larry Snyder to the podium.
Thank you very much. First, I want to say that I've learned something very important today, and for next year, Tom, I do not want to go last. You know, I sometimes over-prepare, and I went through the time when working with Tom, and I wrote out all my notes of all the things that I wanted to say, and unfortunately, being last, the majority of those things have already been talked about. So I did bring with me a clean copy, which means I have a blank slate to work with, so I can pretty much talk about anything that I want at this point. And you know, other than the fact that I just told you I'm going to make some of it up, we'll go about this in a little bit different manner. When Tom and I started talking about this before I was actually brought on board, he told me about the concept of having this summit and you know, what possibly might I want to talk about, and not being a very creative person, as Tom knows, I'm not a marketing guy. I said, well, how about I just talk about the human side of cybersecurity? And fortunately, you know, I'm very comfortable with this because, as you're probably aware of, I'm not a technologist. While I happen to understand technology very well, I do not think that it will solve any of our problems. And far often causes more issues than if we just took into consideration that they only do what we ask them to do, and human beings have a lot more control and a lot more input on this, on the cybersecurity management or cybersecurity field than we would like to accept. So a couple of things I want to talk to you about, and David and Bob have already mentioned some of them, is this concept of defense in depth, or which is a cornerstone to cybersecurity or information assurance, this concept that we can protect our assets by putting up a big wall and putting a lot of technology between those that wish to do us harm and the things that we want to protect. And, you know, as David mentioned, you know, that just does not work anymore. And it doesn't work because we have these phenomenon here called bring your own devices. There's just a recent phenomenon within the past few years where we now have a whole workforce that's bringing to the information security and information technology, information assurance field their own stuff. They're coming to work with Androids and iPhones and laptops and iPads, and they're doing company business, and they're doing work on our data on their own personal devices, which we have very little control over for the most part. And then when they go home at night, they take our data with them. See, the castle defense works very well when we can control our data. It's not a technology issue, it's a data issue. When our data leaves, we lose control over it. So this is a real problem for us in the field of information assurance, in that we've lost control of our data. Our technology kept it safe while it was in our building, but unfortunately it seemed to walk out the door at 5 o'clock. And you know, the interesting thing, and I'll mention it again in a minute, is our workforce has changed dramatically, where we have a whole new generation of what I would refer to as millennial generation workers. 85 million of them are coming to the workforce, and they like to work all the time. Contrary to what you believe, they're not lazy and they're not apathetic. They work differently from what we are used to. They will have no qualms about reading an email or sending an email out at 11 or 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, or 5 o'clock in the morning. You know, even here at BayPath, I'm grown quite accustomed to waking up at 6 o'clock and 5:30 in the morning and finding that some people have emailed me, and I look at it, and I can remember having the conversation in my first week of work here with my wife and saying, did you know that Tom sent me an email at 2 o'clock this morning? What could he possibly have been doing at 2 o'clock in the morning that inspired him to send me an email? And I felt bad because it was now 6 o'clock and I had not yet responded. So, you know, things change, and I do sleep. So I missed out on that. Fortunately, I had a response all prepared. So, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about building this concept of a human firewall. And this is not new. This has been around for quite a while. It just went into a hiatus or hibernation when the Human Firewall Council kind of disappeared, I think right around 2003. But I think we're going to resurrect it here, but we're going to change it a little bit. We're going to move away from just simple security education, training, and awareness, another cornerstone of information assurance. We're going to move to security knowledge and wisdom. We're going to give them the information that they need to know and understand, and they should know. We all know that there's certain dangers with technology or concerns, but we're going to give them enough information where they can actually make decisions that will help us protect our information. It's not enough to tell our employees that they need to have a strong password. They need to understand that a weak password comes with vulnerabilities, and they can contribute to the losses that that organization will experience. So we're going to move away from just training them, because training only lasts while we're at that organization and we're thinking about it. And we're going to make them knowledgeable, with wisdom to make actual decisions that are beneficial to the organization all the time, just like they use our data all the time. I had a great slide on defense in depth, or the castle defense, and we've pretty much hammered that home today. It's the concept of building a wall, whether we're talking about physical security, protecting ourselves from terrorism, or individuals breaking into our network, is gone. We have blown too many holes in the perimeter with bringing in technology like Androids and watching our data move, or USB drives, or whatever it is that people are moving their data with. We cannot do this anymore. We used to be able to, build a big perimeter, and we could put all of our technology between those things that we wish to protect and the people that wish to do it harm. We could really rely on that technology, and we found that we can't do that. And Bruce Schreiner here, he's a cryptographer, an expert in cryptography. He says, if you rely on technology to solve the problem, you don't understand the problem and you really don't understand technology. And that's really what it boils down to. Systems, information systems, the things that we're trying to protect are more than just technology. They're actually, those things that we associate with it, our computing technology and our firewalls and our intrusion detection systems and software like encryption and all that great stuff. But as far as I know, the majority of computers that are used usually have somebody sitting right between the keyboard and the back of the chair. And that's where our problem lies. We can train them to do all the things we want, and we can hope that they can will do the right thing. But the bottom line is they must remain productive. And when security controls get in the way of productivity, we're going to choose productivity. We are businesses, and we need to make money. So the most secure company will be the shortest lived company, right? Because you cannot do business if you're perfectly secure. So Snyder, I like him. He's a great guide. He has another good example of really where we're at. He says, amateurs hack technology. Experts hack people. And that's where we're at. That is the thing that we need to understand. We need to try to harden our user just to the level, or at least to the level where our technology is. So, slow learners in the security field, we take a long time for things to hit home. And I put this up. This is a slide that I stole, or I borrowed from the Computer Security Institute. Every year they do a survey of companies across America, and they ask them about their positions on the security technology they're using and the types of incidents that they have experienced. And this particular slide, I just chose a couple of common threats that we would see, some older ones like malware infections. And for those of not sure what malware is, we're talking about viruses and Trojan horses and that type of thing, malicious software. Pretty easy to solve if we can make sure that we have things like antivirus in place. And as you know, it can be problematic where it slows things down and it irritates us to the point we turn it down. And I was having this conversation yesterday, and I mentioned that when I teach in class and I taught in undergrad, I would always ask, now these students are millennial students, very integrated with technology, I would ask, who has antivirus on their computer? And most of them would raise their hand because they were fairly certain that it was there. But then I would ask, well, can you tell me the last time it was updated? And the hands went down because they just didn't know. And then I would ask, do you know if it's updated? And can you tell me how to figure out if it had been? And again, they just do not know. And I could ask the same here, but I will not because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But antivirus is just a typical problem, and that's really where we're at. And I'm keeping my eye on the clock because we don't want to run over too much. So again, security professionals are slow learners. It's taken us quite some time to figure out, and I think if you look at this, you could say, well, things are getting better, and I would say, yeah, but they're not getting good fast enough. We should be able to get the level of attack of a simple virus, a successful attack of a simple virus, well below 60%, since antivirus technology is by no stretch of the imagination new. But it's about education. Well, how are they being, how is my corporation being affected by antivirus? Well, it's probably coming in on a thumb drive. Or it's probably being picked up at home while you're working on that Excel spreadsheet on your own computer, which you're not sure if you have antivirus on, and then you're bringing it back home, or maybe even emailing it to yourself, right? So again, we have to stop relying on technology. We have to understand that it can hold the line, but it's not going to make it so that we can actually move on to the next thing. And we really want to get away from chasing around the average, common, ordinary cyber criminal or just the malicious person and really get to a point where we can have technology do the things we want it to do. We're only being held back by the fact that we're still trying to focus on problems that should be relatively easy to solve. And things like this should be relatively easy to solve if we just started thinking about the equation, including how our humans how human beings are interacting with that technology. Castle defense, again, and I had mentioned it earlier, and I'm not going to beat it to death, but, this is where we're at right now, and nowhere on this chart, if you could read it, does it say anything about helping people understand how the things they do on a daily basis put us at risk. We certainly can focus on things like data categorization, top secret, secret. We've been doing that for a long time, borrowed it from the military because, again, security, especially in the cybersecurity field, we're not terribly creative. We like to borrow things. application hardening, taking away those known known researched vulnerabilities and putting in patches and that kind of things. But we tend to forget that someplace in this castle, whether we're talking about physical security or logical security, there seems to be a human being involved in it somewhere, and you really don't see that. We certainly will identify them because I'm sure everyone here has a unique user ID, which is probably your email, which gives a hacker or a would-be hacker half of the authentication process already. Right? And then I just got to try to guess your password. And as Bob and David mentioned, I will make you a friend on Facebook, and I can probably guess who your password's going to be. So we do things that are terribly illogical as human beings to, negatively impact our overall security posture. So, this should go away. There is no more need for this castle defense. We really should be looking at it as a field of maneuvering rather than simply putting ourselves behind a bunch of barricades and trying to protect those that are trying to do us harm. And as I had mentioned, this is the biggest problem that we're facing, in my opinion, right now, is all this ubiquitous technology that has just permeated the workforce. And, everyone here probably has at least one smartphone. And has probably got an iPad or a laptop that has company data on it, and you can tell that you're nowhere near work right now. So, those things are at risk, and we need to start thinking about, how are we going to include that in our security equation, right? We have to protect the data, but we also have to understand where it's coming from. The interesting thing and the problem is that when networks are built, they're built very securely. People really think about how they go about putting things together to make sure they have the right technology in place, and that works very well until we put an unsecured wireless network someplace within our organization for convenience, right? And I'm thinking, maybe our employees would like to surf the internet. We don't want them to do it on our company network, so we put an unsecured wireless network. But we forget that, realistically, we are all connected. So we have to make sure that when we bring in all of these external devices, we have appropriate policies and procedures in place, but we also have to make sure that the individuals that we're allowing to access our network with these devices understand that they have a certain amount of responsibility. It may be their device, but it's our data, and we would like to be able to control that data at some point. So what does that mean? Do we want to have the right to manage their personal devices? Maybe we do, but we have to articulate that appropriately in a policy and make sure that they're aware of it. Or maybe we just want to forbid it, but that impacts productivity, right? We certainly don't want to have to get into the habit of buying every employee a smartphone to use for their own personal business or a laptop to take home. It's cost prohibitive. It's going to affect our bottom line. So we might do better by, educating them about the safe use of data, and it causes all sorts of other issues as well. When I have 14 versions of the same financial statement running around on 14 different devices, I have a little bit of an information integrity problem at that point. So we have all sorts of problems with this new concept of bring your own device, and we're going to struggle with that until we begin to realize that when we start to make policy, we have to bring in all stakeholders across the organization. It's very much a holistic approach that we have to take. We really have to bring in not just the IT guys and the security guys and the board of directors, because they're important as well, but we also need to bring in, the folks that are working in accounting and the folks that are working in the risk department and in sales and marketing to understand how they need to use that data and make sure that we put controls in place for that. And then, as Tom had mentioned and Bob as well, when things go bad, we also have to have the appropriate controls in place, because inevitably things will not work the way that we expect them to do, and somewhere along the line a cell phone is going to get left at a restaurant, or a bag full of information might get left on a subway, or your computer might not make it through the airline security checkpoint and end up in your hands but picked up by somebody else's. So we have to have controls in place for when things go bad. We can try to recover from them, and recovery is not enough. We have to be able to do post-mortem. We have to be able to go back and look at the things that occurred, figure out why they occurred, and then put some sort of stopgap measure in place so that they don't happen again. One thing that I was tasked with when I came here was creating an undergraduate degree in cybersecurity, and you know, we are in the process of making sure, or hopefully that will be approved, and we'll be able to bring in some undergraduate students, and we really focused on this as a cornerstone for that undergraduate program, the ability for cybersecurity professionals to leave this college and have the ability to not only put the controls in place that will hopefully prevent or detect a lot of these issues, but more importantly, in my estimation, is when things go bad, the 5 or 10% of the things that will go bad, they actually have the ability to go back and investigate those, figure out what went wrong, and then put the control in place. So we focus very heavily on incident response, network intrusion, and digital forensics. And we're expecting that it's going to be just a fantastic program. Not only can you feel free to hire all my graduates from the graduate program, but you can feel free to pick up any of the undergraduate ones, which I will guarantee will probably be the most qualified undergraduate degree holders in cybersecurity. Probably, you know, I'm going to say in the United States. I don't think there's probably going to be anything better than what they're putting together right now, and for a variety of reasons. Not just the type of student that we get, but you know, and they are a phenomenal group of students. But we're really putting in some cutting-edge stuff here, and hopefully you'll be around in the fall and you can take a look at that program. Back to this, that was my pitch for sales. Tom says I don't market enough. Make a note that I marketed right there. Project War Biking. Sophos, in end of 2012, did a little project called Project War Biking, where they got on a bicycle and used a device to pedal around London for about, 91 miles. Looking for open looking for wireless networking devices that were broadcasting their signal, and then they classified them as far as being open, not secure, or being protected by some level of encryption. And they found that 19% of the 107,000 broadcasting wireless nodes had no encryption. They were open, and some of them may have been hot spots like you see when you go to Subway or McDonald's, and we completely understand that. But some of them were more than likely businesses and homes that were broadcasting unsecure networks. And then another 19% were using a weak encryption, which has, I believe it was probably WEP, which has already been broken. So I said to myself, I wonder what it looks like here, not here, but in the United States, right? So I, being an inquisitive person, said, I think I can do this. So I went out and downloaded a little bit of software and put it on my cell phone, and I'm not as industrious as Sophos was, and I did not actually use a bicycle. I used a car, and I drove much faster than they pedaled on their bicycles, so my reads were probably a little low, but within less than a mile of the community that I did this in, and it looks a whole lot like what you would expect to see demographically in this area, I was able to identify 1,600 visible wireless nodes, right? 1,600 residential and small business nodes, or wireless nodes that were broadcasting their wireless devices. Now, had I been malicious or even a little bit more inquisitive, I may have been able to actually, we could have been a little bit more aggressive and saw what was on the other side of those nodes. But the point is this. When I broke this down, and these are community members, these are individuals who, homes and those kinds of things, and I was probably 30 or 40 feet away driving at 30 miles an hour when I collected this data, 16% of these are open. 16% of the homes that I drove by had open wireless security on no wireless security on their computers or on their wireless network. Now, I would guess if I had the time to go back and visit that 16% and ask them if they left their home at the beginning of the day and did not lock their house up, I would imagine that none of them would probably admit to leaving their home unlocked. But yet what we do here is leave, just another door to our personal information, our most valued personal information, our income tax returns and all that stuff that we have on our computer, open to, and I can't even say it's attack, it's free pickings because it's wide open. I do not need to be a technologist to break into an open network, no more than I need to be a thief in order to walk through an open door. So this is where we're at, and these are the organizations face this risk when their employees, and 16% of your employees go home and use your data on an open network. That's a problem, right? That's a problem. You know, Bob had mentioned, and I'm going to finish up here very quickly. Bob had mentioned that, you know, organizations, and David had mentioned the same, you cannot survive a breach, and breaches are incredibly expensive. And the math as far as how much a breach costs is a little fuzzy, so I don't quote that. But I will tell you this, about 40% of your customers will consider leaving your organization. Well, in other words, they will not do business with you if they learn that you'd have a breach. 20% will leave immediately. Now you have to ask yourself, can I stand losing 40% of my customers because I didn't take the time to make sure my employees understood that they should encrypt their wireless network at home? That's a big risk. And it's probably a risk that most organizations can't withstand. So, you know, what we want to do, obviously, is build this human cybersecurity firewall, and we need to do that through, you know, better than just training. We need to be, you know, more holistic in what we want to do. We want to educate them, but we want to make sure that they understand that what they do directly impacts our organization, and that they can also participate in the downfall of our organization, whether knowingly or unwittingly. They are just as big of a risk as a poorly configured computer. 3 things that I'll leave you with, and then I think we'll do some question and answers. Security begins and ends with that end user. It's between the back of the chair and the keyboard where our security issue is. It's not the technology. We can manage that. We have to get better at managing human beings. Technology is just a tool. There's no technological solution to this, and we've hammered this home pretty well today that we just cannot rely on the technology to solve the problem for us, no more than we can rely on a door lock to keep out you know, a burglar if we put a big window in our door. And that's basically where we're at right now. We've locked it up, but we left a big opening. And then, you know, the grass isn't high enough to hide in. In other words, you cannot expect that they're going to go someplace else. You know, you're connected to the network, you're connected to the internet. And even if you come to me and say, well, you know, I'm not connected, I don't have wireless. As I mentioned, your employees do, because it's very easy to set up a wireless network at home. So you are connected because your employees are connected at home where they're doing the work for you. So, you know, that's important for us to remember. And then, you know, culture of defense across organizational lines. We really need to get it into our culture that security does not come from the deep, dark recesses of the basement where the IT guys, we think, go during the day. And occasionally somebody throws food and water down there, and we think that they're eating it. We're not sure. It's more than that. It goes all the way up to the organizational top level. And as a matter of fact, the board of directors and the CEO, the C-suite, has to drive this, because the IT guys, as much as they want to do it, who really wants to take direction from the guys that are in the basement, right? They do not have much authority, and sometimes they can be a little scary too. So, you know, we really need to go across organizational lines and make sure that we understand that this is an organizational problem, but it's also a cross-organizational problem, because your vendors and your suppliers who are running off from unsecured networks put you at risk. So you got to start talking to other organizations, and we'll talk about the toolbox and those kinds of things that we should expect to be able to have, you know, things like all the technology, all the key employees, and then the things that we have to have when things go bad, like, you know, post-mortem and other protection, because sometimes we just like to transfer that risk to the third party, you know, i.e. insurance, because that alleviates a little bit of our risk as well. So thank you very much, and feel free to ask any questions.
As advertised, we promised we'll get you out by 10 o'clock, but first we'd like to have our speakers come up and grab a little microphone. And if we have folks in the audience who have a question, you've been sitting there a long time, and my guess is that we'll have a few questions out there. In fact, I know Ed Bernstein's here, so we'll actually, yes. Here comes the first question from a student. Okay, great.
Okay, so I'm a criminal justice and forensic psychology double major here at Bay Path College, and I'm also the criminal justice tutor here on campus. I've always wanted to see something with cyber crimes, terrorism, and overall security here on campus, so I'm very much just thrilled that this is going on. I, however, wanted to know if having a psychology background would be a benefit within this field, because right now it kind of sounds like having a business sort of background in criminal justice would have been a much better benefit than maybe psychology.
Well, that's a great question. And I'll turn it over to the panelists in a second, but I want to just say this to you. My doctorate is in organization development, and the minor is in organization psychology. So I would say to you, if you want to get into managing large systems change, it really helps to have a psych degree. This is all about human behavior. Psych degree is a great background, even a minor. If you're a business major, I always recommend psych as a minor. Panelists, would you like to answer that a little bit from a psych perspective? Go ahead.
Thank you. We've had this conversation before, I think, haven't we? I think it's interesting because I think human behavior, as Tom said, is important. How people react to technology. Can you hear? How people react to technology, how to use technology is an interesting study of psychology. And when we're looking at trying to develop changes in cultural behavior, change in behavior of individuals, making them more secure, then I think actually it's a very valid point to raise. And I think we need to be looking at working in a field of psychology that looks at how people and technology work together, and in particularly how they can ensure that they are secure when they're using that technology. So a really interesting area of work, actually.
I'll respond to that. Man, when I wrote my first book, someone said to me, what was the most difficult part of that? And I said, clear writing reflects clear thinking. And to the extent that you have a degree in psychology, you can really understand how people think about things. That can only help you in terms of solving some of these issues.
That's great. Next question. Okay.
As Americans, or as citizens of the United States, we tend to take pride in the fact that we assume that security, or how can I explain this? Can we assume any level of security these days with an online environment?
Larry, maybe give that a try?
Sure. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Why not? I mean, you have to operate on the concept that you're doing everything that you can to be secure. And I think Bob and I were talking yesterday, you know, one of the things that where we fall most vulnerable is we just don't understand what our own personal security posture is. And I gave an example of somebody did a little experiment a few years ago where they created a Facebook page, passed around an email that said, hey, would you like to see the latest pictures of you choose the actor or actress? And they would basically baited individuals to go and click on this link to check out the latest, greatest pictures. And of course, when they clicked on it, it said, oops, your Adobe Flash is not current, right? And then click on this link and we'll update that for you. Unfortunately, what was behind that was a virus that they willingly downloaded. So an aware person would say, you know what, my Adobe Flash is updated because I understand where my machine is at, and therefore something is wrong here. So can we assume that we can make certain assumptions about ourselves? What we can't assume is that the person sitting next to us or the other persons that we're sharing information with are secure. So we have to take everything with a little bit of grain of salt, but if we can start looking at our own personal situation, our own personal computer, and understand where we're at, then we can all get along.
Can I just say something? That's a really good question. That's a really, it's not working again? Is it working now?
You're on.
That's a good question. Because one of the problems we have is that people are feeling insecure on the net. And we want people to use it for all the reasons I said earlier on. Now the problem is, though, that people don't understand what the security problems are. If you were working on your computer and there was a strange man behind you looking over your shoulder, you would do something about it. But the trouble is, we don't understand how these people are getting into the systems. Once we do, once we learn, once we understand what sort of threats we have to face with, then we can start dealing with them. And once people understand that, and they understand the importance of antivirus, and they understand all the other threats that are happening to them, then hopefully they will be more confident and more reassured at using the net. So my answer to you is, yep, you're right, people are worried. Can we ever be secure? No. But you can't protect against everything. But you can do a lot better than we're doing at the moment.
Let me just respond quickly. I think it's a mistake to be lulled into a view. I always said, and I got this from the White House Situation Room, you know, when you think about the future, you think about scenarios. It's sort of like Chinese menu style, how you think about the future. make up different stories and sort of get the commonality of it. But I always put in trips that sort of say, listen, if this thing happens, stop, reassess my view. Don't get lulled into a view. So it's okay to have assumptions, but test them, you know, and make sure that they're still accurate.
Okay, we have a question right up here. Professor Bernstein? I can share a mic for a second, yeah.
Thank you. I have a question and a comment. Humans, of course, are the weak link. We all, I think, have a good sense of that. What specific behaviors do you think might be most important to want to modify in employees who have access to databases at home? And secondly, I've been very influenced by Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And the take-home from that is that people will do anything to avoid thinking.
Yes.
And how much of a problem does that pose in any behavior modification that you wish to make?
Larry, you want to give a try at that?
I guess the advice that we would probably wish to convey first is for those individuals that are using devices at home, please take a few minutes. And I know it's contrary to almost every human being in the world. Actually read the instructions. You know, you go out to Target or Walmart and you buy that $90 wireless network, you come home and you plug it in and it works it does exactly what you want it to do. It allows you to connect the instructions. Unfortunately, you didn't put the disk in, or you didn't read the manual that says there's certain things that you should probably do before you use it, like choose an encryption standard and create a passkey. You know, those are the things that we just have, because it's so easy to do, right? I mean, what does it take, 30 seconds to, I can remember bringing home my first PC into our home. It took a substantial amount of time to get that thing up and running, connected to the internet. Now you can go to Best Buy, buy a computer, and in 15 minutes after you get it home and get all the styrofoam and plastic off, I can be connected to the internet. That's problematic because we don't allow the user to actually, we're not permitting them because it's easy, right? We're not permitting them to actually become self-aware of the security controls that they need to put in place because we've allowed them to bypass that. Do you want to activate your software right now? No, I'll do it later. Do we want to renew our antivirus? Nope, I'll do it later. Remind me later. How about instead of remind me later is you can go no further until you do this. Right? Wouldn't that make it much easier? Or would make us more scared? It wouldn't be easier. It would be problematic. People would probably go buy something someplace else. But at least our stuff would be a little bit more secure.
That's where my concern about Kahneman's conclusions comes.
You know, people, just to respond to your question a little differently, people ask me, what makes a good risk manager? I always say very inquisitive people have strange hobbies, you know, always want to get underneath the hood, always want to understand things. So when you ask the question about what kind of people and behavior should I worry about, well, first thing that comes to mind is anyone who doesn't take a vacation, I worry about that. Two, people who move around the company a lot, you know, get permissions to do certain things, go to other areas of the company, get more permissions. You know, as you keep going around, you keep opening up the locks, you know, and that one person has more and more control of what they could potentially do.
Very good. Next question, yes? Oh, sorry, Brianna.
Is there any way to be relatively safe with storage on the cloud?
Larry is our IT director there.
Back it up someplace else. I mean, you know, to me, cloud storage is less about security rather than ownership, right? I want to make sure that I have control over my data, and when I tend to push it to the cloud, I'm giving up some of that control, whether it's, you know, the copyright issue. But I'm thinking more about controlling that data, and to me, the further away I push my data, the less control over that I have over it. And I'm not knocking cloud storage because it's great, but you know, because it saves us money, because storage can be expensive. But we have to understand that the risk associated with that is twofold. I lose control over it, and I'm expecting another organization to care about as much about my data as I do. So, you know, I store things, the complete opposite. I store things out on Google and that kind of thing, but I also usually keep another copy of it or several copies of it, which is a utility issue. But so yes and no.
I'll respond to that. I think you're onto something. You know, think about this. we're sitting in this room, we have all this data, and we're storing it in the cloud somewhere. We don't know where it is. We don't know what controls are around it. I mean, I think after a couple of years and we peel this onion a little bit, you know, there are going to be some issues here that we need to even think about. So I think you're right onto something.
I want to make an observation and share something with you that this conversation reminds me of. I remember back in the 80s when the Japanese were doing extremely well in the automobile industry. And I was in manufacturing at the time and spent most of my career in manufacturing. And back in the 80s, believe it or not, we were still in a quality control mode in the United States. How many of you in manufacturing out there? Yes, exactly. And you remember quality control where we would stop these errors from happening. That's ancient history now. We all smile when we think about that. You can't just stop people from doing things a certain way. You need to approach the behavior that you want. You start with your behavior and you work back, and you look at the things that are helping you to create that behavior and things that are hindering you. And the Japanese became masterful at this. And they not only moved from quality control and what we later called quality circles, where we got people involved and we empowered people to take responsibility for what was going on in the circles, they started checking data. They started looking at data to see who was doing things the right way and who was doing things the wrong way, what was happening with machines, what tolerances we could maintain, and we started making systematic improvement over time. And then we got to a point where we were able to finally produce at not only their levels, but today's Six Sigma level of quality control. We see it all over quality assurance. We see it all over the world. It's the standard. I sense that that's what's going to be happening here. That we're going to be starting looking for behaviors that absolutely have to exist in an organization, small or large, in order to ensure security. And we're going to back up from that, and we're going to build groups. And then we're going to build cultures. And we're going to make sure that all the stakeholders in the organization are pulling in the same direction. And then we're going to go beyond the organization, and we're going to get into supply chains, just like we do in manufacturing today. We didn't think it was possible to achieve Six Sigma standards that we have today. Today, United Technologies outsources a great deal of their tooling for and their equipment, the parts, for the jet engines to 30 or 40 major manufacturers in northern Connecticut and western Massachusetts, operating at Six Sigma standards in each one of those little operations, okay? That's the kind of standards we're going to have around quality, around information, and in quality assurance and cybersecurity. That's the kind of thing that we'll be teaching in our master's program.
What is the ideal role of law enforcement in mitigating and prosecuting cyber threats?
Law enforcement question. That sounds like a question for Bob. If you could repeat the question.
First thing I would say is that I don't think it's solely the responsibility of law enforcement. That doesn't work anymore. Okay, law enforcement has to work along with all the other agencies in dealing with this particular problem. Okay, but what we do need is we need law enforcement experts. We need people to be able to respond quickly and accurately to these problems. Okay, this is a whole different world, and so the investigators, you know, the law enforcement investigators need to be fully trained. I'd actually send a few of them on perhaps this course that we're thinking about running. That sounds a good idea, because I think that's the only way you're going to approach it. And in fact, what I would do is I would actually encourage law enforcement agencies to start bringing in experts like Larry and helping them work and understand these issues. And one of the big problems we have is not the cybersecurity, but is how we can access computers, how we can get evidence from computers. Because we're seeing that terrorists, organized criminals, pedophiles, sexual predators are all using computers, and trying to get that information from them is becoming extremely difficult and hard for us to do. So not law enforcement, but a whole group of experts working together. That's the answer.
I think it's a mistake to think that law enforcement is going to help you solve this problem. They're overwhelmed, and you have to solve the problem yourself.
And this goes back again. Oh, go ahead, Larry.
You know, as far as law enforcement's involvement, we also have to understand that a very small percentage of people who are victimized in cybercrime, whether it's an organization or a person, report this. This is a largely underreported problem. Organizations do not like to involve law enforcement because we lose control over things when they come in and take evidence. The evidence is our machine, and we need that machine in order for us to operate. If it's a server, then our server's gone. Now we have a problem. So there's a tremendous underreporting. right? And underreporting doesn't solve the problem because, again, we cannot do post-mortem if we are not aware that the incident happened. So in order for law enforcement to take a more proactive role, we actually have to tell them about it. You know, it's a largely underreported issue, and organizations are terribly, well, you know, 40% of your customers walk out the door because they see the police show up and cart away your technology. That's a problem, right? So there's a little bit of a social stigma with cybersecurity, cyber-related crimes as well that we got to kind of fix.
Well, thank you, and we're going to be wrapping up now. We got you at the 10 o'clock. And again, we talked about that, all the global issues that Bob talked about. This is not a problem for Western Massachusetts or Northern Connecticut. This is a problem for the world. The whole world is challenged by our issues of cybersecurity. And we've got into the issue we talked about from a risk management perspective that, believe me, risk manager, the whole industry is paying a lot of attention to what's going on in cybersecurity, and all of our companies are going to be measured going forward. The big four accounting firms right now all have cybersecurity divisions, and they are paying a lot of attention to cybersecurity criteria. Okay, a lot of attention, and our performance. As Larry talked about, we can, if we have a breach in our systems and it becomes public, you can expect to lose customers. You're not going to be recovering those customers, and you know how hard it is to get those customers back. So on the one hand, we have this wonderful access to information, and we have the ubiquity of our mobile devices that make it possible to access information that we never had before, information that allows our supply chains to be totally connected. On the other hand, we have cybersecurity issues that concern us very dearly. We've got technology and IT people that are capable of building systems that will allow us to be able to have that access and to a great extent have that security. But unless we have the human behavior that is aligned with those capabilities of the technology and aligned with the risk assessments that are being made inside of every organization, we won't know what the trade-offs are. We really have to have everybody in an organization understand what the trade-offs are and take responsibility for their own behavior in order for this to work well. Thank you very much for coming, and before you do leave, I want to pass out a few gifts. We gave you one of our famous gifts the other day, so I'm going to give you a second gift, all right? Thank you so much, Bob, for coming across the line. And I have one for our director of our program today, too, because he did an extraordinary job of pulling this together for us.